Were you like a
Like,
good student?
yeah, yeah,
You got good grades and stuff?
yeah.
Oh, don't be embarrassed of it. I mean, it's
Yeah,
cool. I was awful in school and it was like a nightmare for me, like it
yeah.
felt
I
awful.
really feel for people that have that experience. Um, I have had to sit through like seminars and stuff that I'm just completely uninterested in, and I feel like that is what the general public feels when they're at school is just this, painful boredom and just almost sadness when you're sitting in a format that you just cannot get yourself to pay attention. But for me, it just wasn't like that. It just everything felt like a puzzle. Um, I, like many people, have ADD, but the way that mine presents is if I can find like a problem to solve, I get a dopamine hit. So I'll like hyper focus on, whatever task is in front of me. As long as I'm like slightly interested, I'll hyper focus and then I get really into it. So that's why
Yeah,
school was really easy.
that's cool. Like I find as I'm getting older that I'm like a sponge. I've always loved learning things.
Mm-hmm.
But I was awful in school. And like to your point about sitting in a boring seminar, it's like I think more than the boredom, it was like I suck. I'm gonna fail the test. Like I don't know what to do. There was a feeling of like hopelessness. I think
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah,
like I'm
yeah,
like
it
I'm
sucks.
just I just suck. So why bother?
Yeah, I mean, you sounds like you had depression as a kid.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure I did. What were you like as a child? Like as
I
a
was a
little kid?
dork.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I was just the way that my household was split. I spent my weekdays at my dad's house and my weekends at my
Hmm.
mom's house. And at my dad's house, I didn't have a lot of friends in his neighborhood, and um, it was I not to be disparaging in any way, shape, or form, but it was a black neighborhood, and
Hmm.
um, I don't know. I just wasn't really allowed to like go and explore, and I don't know. I was isolated in that scenario, so I spent all of my time watching like movies and famously in my family just reading the encyclopedia, which is
Oh,
very strange. But my dad got me the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I just read them. I just thought
yeah.
it was weird facts or
I used to do
fascinating, I guess.
that.
Yeah,
I
it
would
was
go to
fun.
like the
Yeah,
animals, like nature type stuff though. That was what I was interested in.
yeah. I liked animals and then geography and science and stuff.
Damn, you
So
are kind of nerdy.
yeah, I'm a little nerdy. Yeah,
How was your Catholic school experience? Because I was in Catholic school for kindergarten through eighth grade, so 9 years.
yeah. I did. I did 12.
Ooh,
um, it sucks. It was terrible. So growing up in Philly, you kind of you don't have to go to Catholic school, but the public school education wasn't great. So even if you weren't a practicing Catholic, you went to Catholic school, and um, it was weird. The education wasn't great, but further, I didn't believe in what they were telling me, and I realized that really early. Actually, I remember in third grade they said, if you're not baptized, you go to limbo or whatever. And then they were talking about babies, and I thought, well, if there's a baby out there that, doesn't make it to baptism, or if there's like a kid in Africa who has never heard about this religion, they're going to immediately go to limbo. That never made sense to me, and it didn't click. And I felt like if there's a God out there that thinks that way, I don't really want to be a part of that because that God is kind of a jerk. So it just never really clicked. And I never felt a personal affinity toward religion. And then I found out one of my friends had been abused, and the church covered it up, and he ended up committing suicide after that. So I
oh,
really
what
don't,
grade
I
was
don't,
that?
I found out about that in freshman year, but it was going on from like fifth and sixth grade on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that I know of. Yeah, I don't. I really don't like the Catholic Church. I can stand pretty firmly on that
Yeah, I don't
on
know
that
anyone who
stance.
went to Catholic school who does. Honestly, it has the adverse effect in everyone
Yeah.
I've ever met. I
It's the
remember
quickest way to make an atheist.
I remember, I don't know how old I was, but I started questioning things to my mom because she was the religious one. She was
Yeah.
sort of the ringleader, so she would bring us to church. And I don't know, maybe I was third or fourth grade around that time, and I was like, well, how come you could do whatever you want, but then you can just ask for forgiveness and it's okay, you know?
Yeah.
And I would start asking these really rude, I guess, simpler questions, and she would get frustrated with me. And then some guy died in church. It was an Ash Wednesday mass in the morning, and some guy had a heart attack and like at the end of the aisle, and like it was almost like a movie.
Brutal. Yeah.
This dude started like convulsing, like making
Mm-hmm.
crazy noises in the middle of mass, fell out into the center aisle out of the benches, and then was just like flopping around in the aisle. The paramedics came, they gave him the
Yeah.
defibrillators. He was 31 years old,
That's
and
insane.
he died. And at that point, I was like, man, this is religion's weird. Like, this
Wait,
dude
how old
died
were
in
you?
church. It was probably like third or fourth grade,
Yeah.
so 8, 9, something like
Yeah,
that.
so you're just learning like what mortality is, and then it happens in church at Easter, and you're like,
Yeah, it was crazy. I remember like very shortly after being like, man, like if there's a God, why would you? What? And you're like there worshiping him. Why would you die in church? Like,
yeah,
obviously, freak
is
things
nothing
happen.
sacred?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like that's how the world and life is. But as a kid, I was like, why would God do that? Because at that point, I
Right.
believed in God, and I don't know. At that point, I started. That's when I really started questioning it. Probably like fourth or fifth grade.
But I've kind of more relented that it just simply doesn't matter, and that
Yeah,
being a good person is ultimately the point. You know, like it's just that's the whole point, is just to, be kind and help one another and live well in the community and everything like that. I have a mantra, and it's your right to swing your fist ends at another person's face. Um, Basically, you can do whatever you want. You live, be progressive, be weird, do whatever makes you happy. But as soon as you encroach on someone else's space and freedoms and happiness, then that's where you stop. So if you just kind of navigate with that mindset, it's kind of how I live, or I try to.
I was just watching the old Weekend Buzz, and I was reminded of the video of you choking. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Was that did that make it to the broadcast?
Um,
Do you remember?
I don't know because I didn't watch a lot of the broadcasts. I have like a
Yeah, none
phobia
of us did.
of yeah, it's not
We were
pleasant really.
there. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
So you and Chris met. You were 16, right?
Yeah. I was 16.
So you've spent most of your life uh, as someone who is with a professional skateboarder. Like, how much of your life has felt like your own in a sense?
Not much
Of
of it. Yeah, not much of it.
So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, kind of like what life is like when you meet someone that young and stay with them, and then that becomes like your sort of permanent life.
I wouldn't recommend it. I know that's kind of a silly thing to say, but I on the other side of this whole experience that I've had, I would give the same advice to any female entering a partnership with a man, and it's, don't lose your identity throughout the process. Um, don't let it. Sometimes people try to, push your boundaries, and for one reason or another, you relent. And I think the biggest piece of advice to any woman is do not relent and keep your own identity, whatever that is. Like, I understand the idea of being a stay-at-home mom. I was one, and I see tremendous value in it. But it's extremely important to maintain your identity through that for the health of your kids. You know, you have to model good behavior. So if you're losing your identity, that isn't modeling good behavior, I firmly believe that, you know, with my own kids, I don't, their whole job in life is not to grow up and have children of their own. I'm busting my ass raising them so that they can have fulfilled, um, you know, joyous lives, I guess. Like I said, that sounds corny, but it's truly what
No.
the whole point is, you know? So then, you know, if I can bestow that grace to my kids, I have to learn to give that to myself, which I didn't do for a long time. You know, I didn't give myself the freedom to do the things that I want for my kids. I was put in a position to kind of donate my life and my skill set to someone else and someone else's growth, and it's it's the worst outcome. You know, it's really not good. And even what I mean is, even if you're a stay-at-home mom and you're there supporting your family, you just really need to maintain your own identity throughout that all. But yeah, it has been extremely tough. There was a period of time when, you
Yeah.
know, I was not allowed to finish art school. I wasn't allowed to pursue a lot of the things that I wanted to do. Even when I moved out to California,
Yeah.
there's a bigger story there, but I wasn't allowed to go to nursing school when I wanted to. And there just wasn't time or space for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so at one point, I think I was in a really, really, really deep depression. And I guess something in the back of my head just said, like, you know, go paint. And I didn't really even have any paint. I only had my kids' Crayola tin, you know.
Mm-hmm.
My huge fear for so many years was that I lost the ability to paint, or I lost the ability to make art because I hadn't done it in so
Mm-hmm.
long. So I got in there, and turns out I can still paint, which is great. One of the kids walks in and said, you know, I was walked away from the painting, and they were like, "Who painted that?" I was like, "Oh, I did." And they were like, "You can paint?" And it was really sweet interaction, but it was really heartbreaking because I was like, my kids don't even know me. You know,
Yeah.
they don't even know who I am. And from that point, I just literally from that point on, I just decided to change that.
I want to go back to when you were younger, but just to stay on that thought, when you say you weren't allowed to go to like nursing school or art school or whatever, like what do you mean by that?
Um, so with art school, I went to Tyler School of Art, it's a part of Temple University in Philly.
Mm-hmm.
And I got pregnant in my freshman year, like summer
Mm-hmm.
freshman year. I guess actually it might have been my sophomore year. But I had all the plans in the world to finish my college education. I thought maybe it would take a little bit longer, and I'd have to go to school during the summer. I thought I'd maybe have to take less classes
Mm-hmm.
at a time. Um, and every time there was finals, it was around the same time that Chris would have to go on a tour or something. Like it just got in the way. And he would have to go on a tour and he wouldn't tell me until a day or two before he was actually going to go on like a 2 week tour. So I'm at home with a new baby, we had gotten a puppy stupidly, but we had gotten a puppy and had a new baby. And I didn't have any childcare to, you know, be able to go to school. There was no pre-planning. So that was a really frustrating situation. So that coupled with Jamie had offered Chris a board company if Chris would move to California. So Jamie basically said to Chris, if you move to California, we'll start a board company. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really silly for you to be in Philadelphia and have to travel back and forth to do tours. And every time we need a photo, you have to fly out here. It's just really cumbersome. So you should just move out here and we'll start a board company for you. So Chris came to me with that info, and I said, you know, I was a junior, my third year at that point, and I said, you know, can we wait a little bit? You know, can we just hold out a couple years and I'll
Mm-hmm.
finish my education? And he said, well, it's really getting in the way anyway, so I'm going to move to California. He owned the house at this point. I didn't own any of it, and he said, I'm going to sell the house. I'm going to move to California. You and Wyatt can come if you want, but I'm going. So effectively, that's, you know, it's not forcing me to quit school.
Yeah, there's not
Um,
much of a choice.
yeah, I call that the illusion of choice. I could have. I think about that often. I really wish I had just, put my tail between my legs and moved back in with my mom and finished school and um, just raised. My life would have been better. Just as plainly as I can put it, I wish every day that I had done that, but I didn't.
Were you guys married at the time?
No, we had gotten married right before we moved to California. So I think about 6 months after that. Even from before I got married, I knew like it didn't feel right. It never really felt right, and I wasn't listening to myself. And I wish I did. There's another aspect to it too, and where it's I was being put down for my choices. Like, well, you're going to art school, you're not going to make much money. I'm going to make money if I go to California. So a lot of that financial like degradation was kind of present. Like just kind of, well, what is your degree even going to be worth? So why do it? There was a lot of that, and I believed it. I believed that my only way to support Wyatt was for Chris to support us.
And there
And it's
wasn't
not.
even. Oh, go on.
No,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't even. Was there a board company that ever happened?
No,
Yeah.
no, no. That was a real kick in the pants, I guess you could say. Yeah, that bummed me out. I absolutely could have stayed in Philadelphia for another couple of years and just finished my degree. And it's one of the biggest sources of my depression, because I believed for so long that I wouldn't be able to make anything of myself and I wouldn't be able to make a good career. And now, knowing what I know as an adult, I would have been extremely wealthy had I gone to university and finished university, went on to get my master's. I would have been fine. I would have been completely fine. It would have been
Yeah.
hard for a few years with a new baby, but nowhere is near as hard as what I dealt with.
So when you guys met, where was like very first met and started dating? Where was Chris in his skating career? Because I don't really know that
Um,
timeline.
he had just gotten on Zero, I think, within a few months of me meeting him. I was there when like Jamie would send him boxes and stuff like that, and that kind of stuff.
I mean, his career starts to go crazy. So your whole life revolves around that, right?
Yeah,
Or you have to accommodate that.
yeah, yeah. And I tried really hard to do so. I understand. Also being a creative, I wanted to support someone's creative endeavor. Like, I always would. I still do that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
engaged to a musician, and I think there's a lot of beauty in that. But I also think that you don't have to sacrifice. I wish I would have been given that ability and freedom as well. It doesn't. One doesn't have to cannibalize the other. It doesn't actually take the resources of the entire family to make something like that work. In fact, if the entire family is healthy and thriving, you're better off in the long run. So that was the real downfall. But yeah, our entire lives were revolved around the beginning of that career. And before even Wyatt came along, because there was about 3 years of his career doing well, I feel like everyone's lives, even within the friend group, everyone's lives was surrounded by his success.
Well, yeah, because he was like the cool, good skater, right?
Yeah, yeah. We weren't in California. We were in, you know, far northeast Philadelphia. There's not a ton of great. There's a good amount actually. It's
Yeah.
oddly enough, there's a pretty good amount of skateboarders over there. But at that time, he was a big fish in a small pond. And that's not
Were
to
there?
take away from his talent. And he would have been
Oh,
a big
yeah.
fish in a big pond over here too. And he was. I would never in a million years disqualify that. That's
Yeah,
not
I
fair
was
what he
just
was
gonna
doing.
say there had to be moments um, that were very like fun and exciting too throughout that journey, right? For you, or
Yeah,
oh,
there were, um, and there's not a memory that I have that isn't riddled with like some sort of negative
oh wow,
aspect. You know, yeah, there isn't.
that's
That was a
crazy.
big that was a big point of contention toward the end of my marriage when I would be asked like were you ever happy, and I I can very confidently say not really. you
Oh
know
wow.
um and I tried to make the best of it. I really did. And like I don't
Mm.
want to come across as like this is a huge fear of mine. I'm really afraid of people looking at the situation from the outside and seeing like what do you have to complain about. You have this great life, this awesome house, this and that, and you know you didn't have to work and things like that, and not seeing the nuance in that. And it's not even nuance, it's somewhat blatant if you were to sit down and talk with me. I wanted to work. I've never wanted to not work. I wanted to be financially independent. I'm very afraid of not being financially independent because I came from that type of situation. I All of our travel was surrounded by skateboarding. Like we never really went on a whole lot of like vacations or getaways or trips as a family. It was always surrounded by skateboarding. There was never anything that I wanted to do that I was able to do. It was always centered. It's always Chris centric or skateboarding centric. And I like skateboarding. I still like skateboarding, um, but that's not my identity. But I don't. I'm afraid that people would see me as an ungrateful brat.
Yeah, I
But
could see
it is
that.
what it is.
Have you met other women who were partnered up with skaters that felt the same way?
Um, yeah, but they broke up with them.
You stayed.
Yeah, I had a kid. I've also seen people and I'm thinking of a couple, and I don't want to name them, but they have a somewhat similar relationship where one person's a famous skateboarder, and then the other person is just a normal person. But their lives weren't uprooted in the name of skateboarding, and they have a pretty mutually beneficial relationship with both of them, and it seems like they're both respected inside of their family. So I think
Oh wow.
that is a key difference.
As someone who's on the female side of things in the skate industry, I wondered if you'd ever heard like a lot of stories about abuse, being more common than we might think from professional skaters.
Yeah, I'm not going to name names, but I know of three or four off the top of my head. It's
Oh,
somewhat common. It's also like, just to be frank, it's pretty common in general. It's a
yeah.
more common scenario than people really think. It's almost the stories become cliche. Like I feel like my story is kind of cliche. Which is kind of embarrassing. Like the signs are all there, and you just can't see it when you're in it.
You were talking about, um, you were talking to a friend, and your friend was like, "Oh, do you something about your name? Do you mind if I call you Christine or something?"
Yeah.
Um, and you told me that story, and I'd like to hear it. But was that also the catalyst for you deciding to speak out about this and do your
Mm-hmm.
post?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was out at a friend's bar in San Diego, and my girlfriend was there. We ran into each other, and we were just chatting. She's like, "Hey, Red, how you doing?" And out of nowhere, she was just like, "Do you care if I call you that? Do you like not want me to call you that?" And I just started bawling. I just started crying.
Wow.
And I didn't crying out. I didn't mean to. I don't want to be the girl crying at a bar. It's so embarrassing. Luckily, I
Oh,
was
there's
there
the
with.
drunk girl.
I know, and like I was kind of drunk. I just came from a baseball game, so and luckily I was there with good friends, and Um, but yeah, I told her, I'm like, no, I hate it. I really don't want anyone to call me that. It's not my name, first of all, and it just immediately brings up all these memories that I try really hard to, suppress on a daily basis. So she was just like, why haven't you told me? Like, what are you doing, you idiot? So we just shouted. She's like, you need to tell people. And I thought about it for a couple days, and my thought was, before that, my thought in not bringing it up constantly was that every time I would hang out with someone, I'd have to bring it up. Every time I'd have to correct someone, and they'd ask, well, why don't you want to be called that? And I'd have to tell them, and it's just like a hard conversation to have. It's super vulnerable. You're worried that you're going to get weird looks, or that people aren't going to believe you, or whatever it may be. So I just stayed quiet for a long time and just felt like, oh, it's not a big deal. Whatever. I have red hair. Doesn't matter. People think it's cute. So yeah, I just figured putting it on the internet, putting it on my Instagram would be the easiest way to just tell everyone very quickly and very simply to not call me Red anymore, and here's why. That's all I wanted. I wasn't even going to go any further than that one post.
Mm-hmm.
But the internet dug up our old view and kind of, yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, I didn't know any of it was going on, and someone on Slap tagged me into the discussion, and I was like, "Oh God, here goes. These guys are trying to like proximity cancel me again."
Yeah.
Like like I did something wrong, and but looking back at that story, when you were telling that story, were you just telling a story that you thought would be entertaining? Were you trying to like communicate something? You know what I mean? Like,
I do know what you mean. Physical abuse hadn't happened at that point. Well, I
mm-hmm,
guess technically it had, but what I mean is my person was not hit or choked at that point. So I was still able to compartmentalize and justify it, I guess. I wasn't happy about it when it happened, but I guess time heals wounds, I guess. So at that point, it had become a funny story. And it had been told around me so many times, and people laughed about it, that I just, you know, thought it was normal. I thought that something like that was a normal thing to happen.
mm-hmm,
Obviously, I now know that it's not. And, you know, people even back then were calling it out for what it was. And I went to bat for Chris on the Slack message board. And I remember doing that, and I remember sitting on the sofa. I saw it, and I had pointed it out to Chris, and I was like, look at what people are saying." And he's like, "Everyone on there is a fucking idiot. They don't know what they're fucking talking about," which is the general sentiment within the skateboard community, I guess. But
yeah,
I was afraid that it was going to hurt his career, because it would have. Um, And so I went to bat for him, knowing in my heart that I was betraying myself, I guess. And I
mm-hmm.
remember writing it and showing him. I think I said something like, "This is like, I did this for you."
So he didn't ask for you to do that or anything.
No, he didn't ask, but I was very involved in Chris's career, and like taking
Mm-hmm.
meetings and answering emails and stuff. So I was worried that it would have negative backlash if it had gotten like taken hold. So, and I knew that me commenting would be the best thing to kind of strike it down. Just
Yeah,
sort of aware of that. So I did that, and I showed him. I knew, like, I did this for you. And he said, you shouldn't have to do something like that. I'm sorry that happened. Um, I'm sorry you had to do that. So he acknowledged it. That was a very common cycle. Like, something bad would happen, and when the waters were calmer, he would apologize and sound genuine and sound guilt-ridden and everything like that. So I then felt like I'm being a cold bitch if I don't accept that apology. So that was the cycle. So he apologized in that moment, and I showed him that I wrote that on Slap. And then years later, probably 3-4 years ago, I actually messaged that person on Slap that had originally called it out for what it was, and I just told them, I'm like, you were right. It actually progressively got worse after that, and I'm sorry that I didn't listen to you, and I wish I had. Thank you for saying that all those years ago. And they were really kind. They actually put me in contact with someone back then that would have helped me get the story out. But the girl that he put me in contact with just asked me, you really have to think about what you want to come of this. Like, what do you want to happen? And I didn't have an answer back then because all I wanted was to tell my story. And I personally had felt like that wasn't a good enough reason. I now don't think that. And I think telling your story is a perfectly good reason to speak up. There's no better reason, I had never wanted like sponsors or anything to retaliate or drop Chris. I am very aware of marketing dollars and how they're smartly spent. So I understand that is a fallout of something like this coming to light, but that wasn't my personal intention. It doesn't matter in my personal life whether a sponsor keeps him on or not. It doesn't change my experience, and it doesn't. And that's not to say that I'm not thankful for anyone who has stood in solidarity either. I just mean at that time, I wasn't looking for revenge and I wasn't looking for action. I just wanted to be heard, and I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't know how to get that across.
How did it feel on that when we were doing that interview? How did it feel telling that story? Because we were all kind of laughing, and I'm wondering how you felt inside in the middle of that.
I had just dissociated from like my own sense of self enough at that point that it didn't hurt. I was laughing about it too. I don't know. Have you ever like had an embarrassing story or like a drunken story where you're just like, maybe it's because growing up, just being in a ballbuster family, you're good at making yourself the butt of the joke sometimes. So I'm very good at, being self-deprecating. And I think that was kind of the psychological stance that I was in. And I wasn't hurting my own feelings in the moment or anything like that. I'm hurt by it now. I'm just sad for myself, But at the time, no, I was just being self-deprecating. And I also thought I was the villain, like I was the bad guy because I was being a bitch, And I wasn't.
Yeah.
I just wasn't. I've done a lot of justification over the years of trying to explain to people why he and I would have fights. And that one was that we had plans. I wanted to go do something, and he felt like his plans were more important, and I had just felt disrespected. And I was very young at the time too, and I didn't know how to communicate that my needs mattered. So I just said, okay, fine. My needs matter right now. Leave me alone. I'm going to go leave. And that was met with violence. And I at that time, didn't know that it was going to escalate.
So he sees a bike pump and he just picks it up and just hurls it at the car, and it just shatters the windshield. And at first, like as he's walking away, I'm like, well, now he's going to have to fix it. And I'm just like super pissed and like just girly and bitchy about it. And then he throws the bike pump and it just shatters my windshield. And I was like, oh my God, like that was so close to just shattering my face.
Was that the first time something like that happened?
That was the first like explosive event like that.
Oh, wow.
There was an event prior that sexual assault was involved. So, but it wasn't an explosive, violent type of event. So yeah, that was the first violent, um, violent expression, I guess.
So compared to how you told that story on the show, how scared were you in that moment?
I was terrified.
Mm.
Um, I just felt really vulnerable, and like if I, you almost like play possum. Like if I make any move, it's gonna instigate further and make it worse. So I'm just gonna sit here and wait, and hopefully nothing else happens, um, and just yeah, that's the response in that moment.
So what was it like after that event? I mean, like going back in the house.
I mean, scary and humiliating, I guess, because it's weird to not be able to get what you want when what you want is a basic need. You know, when you know, like I felt like I lost, and that felt humiliating, and then I felt bad because he had to go talk to the windshield repair guy, and he came in, you know, downtrodden, and he had a good way of making me feel guilty for things that he did. You know, like immediate, you
Mm.
know, I can't believe I did that, and um, you know, just making you feel like I no longer have a right to be upset about what happened. So, kind of cutting me off at the knees with being upset. So I just felt, yeah, just humiliated and stuck, trapped.
So you saying that that was sort of like the first explosive event. Is that a sort of icebreaker moment? Does it start to happen more frequently after that?
Yeah, so it would happen when he was very frustrated. There was a lot of like shoulder shaking and body shaking. So I do know that that's also not okay, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not the severity of what I'm talking about. You know, when it started to get pretty bad was when street league started. There were super like high stress moments, and it was usually when he wasn't doing well. At hotels, there would be violence at hotels, and those were scary. So when you mentioned earlier, there must have been some fun times. Like street league was really fun, you know, especially the early days. It was like camp, and there was like always parties in the hotel lobby. Like that was a lot of fun,
Yeah, it was.
but it was always coupled with Chris just being violent. Not every single time. I don't want to over exaggerate, but it was a number of times. And his move during those would be to, you know, push me to the ground and then throw loaded suitcases at me. And that sounds really silly. I don't know if it sounds silly, but to me, it
No.
just sounds weird. But it's full of, you know, skateboards and trucks, and it's extremely heavy. You know, it's extremely dangerous. So yeah, and that's what would happen a couple times. Um, yeah,
So
sorry, it's hard to.
no. We can you can take your time. You can say whatever you want or don't want. But I mean, when you if you get hit in the back with a suitcase or hit with a suitcase, I mean, what happens in that moment? If I got hit in the back with something heavy, I imagine I would have trouble breathing at that moment. You get the wind knocked out of you. All of these things can happen in that moment. Like, is that the
Um,
end of it? Like you got hit once and it's over? Is it
no, there's two. I'm only going to talk about two instances because I have evidence of them. But
okay?
um, one time in Chicago, he did that, and then he threw the suitcase at me. And this was the night before the contest. So he throws a suitcase, and it hit me in like the shoulder. So I didn't get my wind. I didn't get the wind knocked out of me that time or anything, but it was enough to knock me to the ground. And it was, you know, when you're in a double bed hotel, there's that like little space between the bed and the wall to the bathroom. So I
Mm-hmm.
just got knocked down inside that little wedge, And at that time, I was close to the door, so I got up and left. I grabbed whatever bag I could grab, and I got up and left. And I believe security was called at that time, but I wasn't there when security arrived. So I left and I went downstairs and got a lift to the airport. This is also like years of this happening. Like I knew what was coming, so I knew that I should leave.
Yeah.
So I went to the airport, but by the time I got to the airport, he had turned all of my cards off, so I couldn't get a flight out. So I sat there for about an hour. I actually like thought about just waiting for a full day until my flight. Just like, it's an airport. I can stay here. But I didn't have enough money to like buy food. So I just waited a while until I thought maybe he would have calmed down or fallen asleep. And I went back to the hotel and then just like, just avoided talking, and just avoided the situation. I had been married for long enough that I knew the behaviors, I guess, and I knew how to navigate and avoid anger coming out. So I just, avoided certain topics and then went to the next day's street league like nothing had happened.
You said you learned how to navigate it, but you're going back into the room after that happened, right? Mm-hmm. Are you scared it's going to happen again, or is it just pretty much a pattern where you'll get an apology or the silent treatment and you can just like go to sleep?
Yeah, I guess in that moment, like you said, the pattern. So this wasn't new behavior, so I knew what was going to happen. And I wasn't afraid that he was going to attack me in that moment or anything, but I was afraid of the guilt trips and the next phase, and inevitably me having to accept an apology and act like nothing had happened. Like that felt like such personal betrayal to myself, and that was really what was hard in those moments. The fear happened before, but when there's distance between those, the frustration that you feel when like I'm stuck, like I'm stuck again.
Did you ever get blamed for contest performance?
Yeah.
Not being good?
Yeah, and it's just it's really silly. I think that from my view, when he knew he wasn't going to be doing well, he was getting pissed off at me and fights would be caused, and that was a good excuse.
I was like preemptive.
Yeah. Looking back on it, that was the pattern. I remember one fight happened the night before Street League, and he actually won the Super Crown the next day. It's no secret that there's anger involved in Chris's skateboarding. Everyone has seen the Wallenberg video.
Yeah. I
can't even begin to guess, but maybe there's some sort of tether inside of that, like anger and performance. I don't know. The Chicago one that I'm speaking about was later in his career, and he had already not been, winning at that point, which is normal. But the other times that would happen after he didn't do well. Another time was in Hollywood. We were at the Hollywood Roosevelt, and that time I was at the other side of the room, and he threw the suitcase. I don't know why that was his move, but he threw the suitcase, and it hit me and then hit the window of the hotel room. And we called his manager, and we told him what happened. And his manager called the hotel and said, my athlete's in your room, and closed the window too hard, and the window shattered. So just kind of skirted that so that we weren't charged for it.
When he called his manager, did he tell him the truth, or did he tell him that he closed the window and it shattered?
No, he told him the truth.
Oh, wow. So the manager knew.
Yeah, the manager knew.
Did he ever reach out to you after that?
He would reach out to me, and it felt genuine, but also nothing ever happened from that. So I'm a little resentful now, later in life.
Yeah.
Um, that person specifically could have really helped me and saw what was happening. I don't know. And I have texts where I've reached out to that person and just said, "This is what's happening. Can you help me?" I had during that time I had phrased it to everyone that I reached out to as helping Chris,
Mm-hmm.
because this was, all of our friend circle was employed by Chris, so me telling them was a direct, financial conflict. They had vested interest in keeping Chris's news and business quiet.
Yeah.
And I understood that at the time, but I just felt like, I don't know, I thought that people would still do the right thing and maybe help me anyway, even though it could mean a financial burden was coming. I don't know. So I would always phrase it as, can you help him so that he stops doing this, and that didn't happen either. They would just talk to him, and he would give him the sob story, like, oh, I know you shouldn't be doing that, but whatever he would tell them and make them feel, because Chris definitely 100% comes across as a nice guy. I understand that. That's
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I've
I get
interviewed
it.
him more than anybody I've actually ever interviewed. I thought about
No,
that the other
really,
day. Yeah.
that's crazy.
Just coincidentally, probably because he's won so many events and stuff. But
Yeah, he is a nice guy, and I that was another reason why I felt trapped, because who's going to believe me now? Doing as much research on this topic as I have, like, that's actually a pretty common trope as well. It's pretty cliche, you know. But
when you decided to try to reach out to people about this, like, was that a breaking point for you? Like, I need to talk to people.
yeah, um, Chris and I would go back and forth about him going to anger management, or him getting help, or us going to therapies, or whatever solution I could come up with that would maintain anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't work. And then I would say to him, like, I have to reach out to someone, and he would get mad at me and say, like, you're just trying to ruin my career. And I wasn't. I was just trying to get help.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Chris doesn't have a whole lot of family. They're not close. It was just, I don't know, it was tough. But there weren't a whole lot of people to reach out to other than people employed by Chris. So that made it really difficult. And to go back to when you were asking, are other girls in this situation, with skateboarders,
Mm-hmm.
the hardest part about being in a domestic violence situation with someone that is well known is that it is in a lot of people's best interest to keep that quiet, whether it's a social cachet that they're trying to cash in on,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't want my friend to not be famous anymore, because then we're not going to be the cool kids, or whether it's literally a financial burden for someone. So a lot of the people around me weren't on my side. So that was a real that's hard. Even now, I'm still seeing certain people not give a shit, and that's a real bummer.
Did you reach out to Jamie?
Yeah, I didn't reach out to Jamie for a long time, because I was afraid that if I did, that it would hurt us financially, because I was told such. Um, I did reach out to Jamie within the past 4-ish years, when the violent threats started being thrown toward my kids. Um, I felt like Chris really needed help that was far beyond anything I was willing to do or even capable of doing. Um, I obviously, at that point, I wasn't able to help this person for so many years. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to be the one to help him at that point. So then I did reach out to Jamie, and I told him that, Chris had threatened the kids. And he called Chris and got Chris's side of the story, and he said that, you know, Jamie told me that he wasn't the right person to get involved. There were two separate incidents of this happening, and Jamie will say that I didn't tell him about physical abuse. I didn't tell him all of what I've told you so far, and I didn't tell him specifics. But what I did tell him was, he's threatening the kids, and there is abuse present, Jamie. And he said, well, that's going to turn into a he said, she said, and I'm just not the right person to get involved. And I said, well, there's evidence. I have evidence. I can show you evidence. That you don't have to just believe me. I can prove it to you. And he said, regardless, I'm not close with Cole anymore, and I'm not the right person to get involved. A lot of this, like the stuff that was going on during the divorce, was to get Chris to take care of the kids in the way that they needed to be taken care of. They were living in really horrible conditions, and he needed to get help in order to be a dad for them, and that's what I was trying to do. And he was stalling the divorce process for a couple of years at that point, and it was just getting really difficult. So that's why I was reaching out to Jamie. I was at a breaking point.
And Chris was on 0 at the time that you were reaching out to Jamie?
He was on 0, yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think the threats and why do you think it switched to the kids?
I think because he knew that's what I cared about. At this point in my life, I didn't give much of a shit about myself, and I had been through the abuse with him for so long that, it didn't work, I guess. I mean, it did work. It actually got violent, even more violent after that. But I just think he knew it would get to me, and it did. Of course, it's going to get to me. All of my decision making from the moment I found out I was pregnant with Wyatt has been whatever is best for my kids, like almost to a detriment. I've chosen the wrong path because I thought it was the best path for my kids a lot of times. And if anything comes of this, I want to be able to give other women advice on how to navigate that, because it is a really tricky situation. Do you leave a situation and put your kids at a financial deficit, or do you endure what you're dealing with, and hopefully it'll get better, and hopefully you can say the right thing next time, and you're not gonna get hit, you're not gonna get choked. But that's not a real scenario, and actually the best thing for your kids is to get them out of that scenario so that they don't normalize those behaviors, and mostly so that they don't normalize those behaviors, so they're not exposed to things like that.
You mentioned earlier about the sexual assault incident. Like, do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, I might have to get tissues at some point, but
whatever you need to do.
Yeah, that was pretty early on in our relationship. I'm not going to say whose wedding it was, because they are not involved in any way. It's just like a marker of time. But we were at a hotel, and we were both drinking, and I just didn't want to have sex. My son was really young at the time, and just wasn't into it. Yeah. And I'd made that very clear. And he got really angry because I think he just felt, entitled to sex because he had paid for the hotel room, or whatever his reasoning was. Or, we had time away from the kids, and it should happen, it was something that should happen. So I was drunk, and I fell asleep in the hotel room, and I woke up the next day, and there was just, evidence. I had semen in and on me, and I just, I knew that I had been penetrated. And I was confused, and I just kind of waited for a little bit, and then just asked him, what happened? Why is this here? and he just got kind of sheepish for a little bit and was just like, well, I knew you didn't want to, so I just thought it would be better if you stayed asleep. So I didn't wake you up, and I just let you sleep through it. So that's why I didn't wake you up, because I knew you wouldn't be into it. So I thought it would be better for you if you just stayed asleep. And I was like, that's rape. You raped me. That's what rape is. And he flipped out. He didn't get violent with me at that time, but he went to the window and put his hand on the window and just started like crying, I guess, and saying like, I can't believe I did that. I'm a rapist and I should just jump out this window. And that was really jarring because, I'd been sexually assaulted before that, not by him. He knew about it, but I don't know. It just felt like in that moment, I was like, is this always what happens? Like, is there anyone out there that's not going to do this to me?
Yeah.
And I didn't have anyone to talk to, it was just, I had to drive home with him. And it's a really odd feeling to have the father of your kid, the owner of the house that you live in, do that to you and kind of take your consent away in that way. Yeah, it's just, it sucked, and that never left for me.
It's okay.
I should have gotten tissues because I'm going to use toilet paper. Yeah, that just never left throughout like my marriage, and then even after when I started dating again. It's not that like I was repelled by men or anything like that. It was just the idea of consent was just so warped, and I felt that like pretty clearly throughout my marriage with Chris. I thought at one point I was asexual. I thought I was gay at one point. Like, I jokingly call myself reluctantly straight, but I quite love my fiance, so I don't think that's quite true, but yeah, I didn't like sex, and it was like a violent repulsion towards sex for a long time.
How do you look at your husband after that and like your perspective of him, like from that moment on, like whether it's resentment or disrespect or whatever the word is, right? Like,
yeah, I had a hard time respecting him for sure, because I don't like people that do that. I had to do a lot of compartmentalization, a lot of like quieting of my own mind and like disregarding my own feelings. But I think that moment, I mean, there were a few moments that forever changed my opinion of him, but that was definitely one of them. And it was just really hard. I never recovered fully from that. And I should have left at that time.
How does that kind of incident, and you said there was even one prior with somebody else, like how does that affect moving forward with other men, and especially you're engaged now, and like all this stuff stays with us, I don't want to make assumptions, but you have these sort of battles or struggles to be a good partner to somebody else.
It's a pretty common experience for women, and what I've found is that there are a few good guys out there that are experienced in dealing with girls that have dealt with this. So I'm thankful for people like that who are able to hold space in those like super intimate and vulnerable moments. Not even just sex, just intimate moments. So some of the people that I've dated have helped repair that trust that I have with men in general. So that's part of it. But I'm not fully over it. It's not just sexual assault. It's a humongous part. It's like just so deeply traumatic. But then it's the personal betrayal of, you know, staying with that person, and then that person going on to physically assault you and threaten your kids and threaten your future and degrade you, make fun of you, and all of this stuff. And what happened to me by the end of my marriage is that I didn't care if that happened to me again, because it felt normal. You know, that was just kind of normalized. So it wasn't even that that was a fear of mine, that was like an expectation of mine.
Wow.
And I think that that's like, that's kind of the hardest part, because like I have a daughter, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
when I mentioned earlier that one of the best things you can do is take the harder road and just leave as soon as you can, because the signal that you know are then giving your daughter and your son is that these things are normal and they're to be expected. And I'm not even a good person to like, I'm like not good at teaching how to avoid it, you know, like I don't know how to do it myself. So how am I supposed to like guide the next, how am I supposed to guide my kids to avoid it? That's the hardest part. It's not being able to trust yourself. Sorry.
Oh, no, don't be sorry. Do
And
you
then,
feel
like, it's their dad, you know, like that's the other part. It's their fucking dad. Sorry. Go ahead.
no, don't be sorry at all. Do you feel have you been able to have conversations with them about all this in a way that can hopefully teach them what we're talking about now? You know, you don't want your son to end up acting the way Chris has. You don't want your
Yeah.
daughter ending up being a victim. I've been in relationships where I've seen that stuff passed on, you know. I've dated girls who like always end up with someone who abuses them, or always
Yeah.
ends up with someone who cheats on them. And I've heard so many stories that I can't even believe how many girls I've met that have told me they've been raped. Like
Yeah.
the number was so
it's
staggering to me
Yeah.
that it's not that I didn't believe them. I'm just saying like, how could this be? Like, this is
It's
really this
unfathomable.
common.
That's a hard one.
Yeah. Unfathomable.
It's hard to believe. And everyone has just such a similar story, you know, and people just don't want to believe it. They don't care to believe it. I don't know. It's a really sinister culture surrounding, you know, rape culture in general, and how it's become so normalized that it is a cliche, and you know, it no longer holds value, and that's really horrible. And I that's not entirely true. You know, there are, like I said, there are people who are holding space for that, and I'm personally forever grateful for anyone who does that and holds space for, you know, any type of assault victims. But there's still like a long road to go. It's just justified and normalized, and it's gross. I remember when I first started dating my fiance, he it's really interesting to be in a relationship where fights happen and they don't explode, and they don't I'm allowed to be upset at things, you know, because yeah, I have a communication style that's just very like concise and robotic maybe. But it's
Yeah, but
just
we're also
how,
East Coast too.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there is some of that. And, I'm from Jersey, and it's like different out
yeah.
here.
The one story that always kind of cracks me up, but the story about like a salary conversation, and trying to explain to, like I said, I was had to manage a lot of my
Yeah.
relationship, and um, Chris felt like I was trying to control his life, and arguably to a degree that is what I was trying to do to his benefit. I was trying to someone had to be in control. And I have a new relationship with the word control now. Like it's not actually bad to be in control of some things.
Mhm.
So when things were going off the rails and not in control, I would have to rein things in. And one of the situations was, the idea of salary and whether or not Chris was obtaining an actual salary from his sponsors. And it's my opinion that skateboarding takes advantage of its athletes
Mhm.
pretty terribly. I'm not a fan of it, but um, Chris told me that he got a salary from one of his sponsors, and I said, no, you don't get a salary, because if you got a salary, you'd also get these other benefits that come with a salary. We argued about it, and he said, I get a guaranteed $2,000 a month from, I'm not going to say the company, but I
Yeah.
guaranteed $2,000 a month. I said, well, no, that's a guaranteed minimum of your royalty payment. Have you ever sold less than $2,000? And he said, no. I said, that's not a salary. That's a guaranteed minimum. If you don't make less than $2,000, if you don't sell more than $2,000 worth of product, that's that $2,000 means nothing. You should
Yeah.
also be getting that $2,000 as a salary on the side, because you're selling the entire brand, not just what's your name has your name on it. And that type of conversation was really threatening to him, because he would then retort, uh, you don't know anything about skateboarding, you don't know what you're talking about. And that was really frustrating for me, because what I was actually trying to do was take care of him, his career, and my kids, my child at
Yeah.
the time. And that was really deeply unsettling for me, because I knew I was right. There's it's a fact. This is how the
Mhm.
facts roll, and later on, when he got on a different company that paid properly, he found out that he was actually getting taken advantage of, and I was right at the time. And I was never given that respect as, kind of the. I don't want to be super disparaging, but I wasn't given the respect of being the brains inside of
Mhm.
the
Yeah, I
that
understand.
role. And I didn't, in my mind, like he didn't have to be the brains. Um, he was the talent. That was fine with me, but it was deeply unsettling for him, for me to step in that way, and that was a lot of source of frustration, which was a bummer. But regardless, like that shouldn't end in physical violence, and that's kind of why we're here, why I'm here.
Yeah. Explain the backlash to us and how it feels,
Um,
and what you read and see and hear after you decide to speak up about something like this. When you were married to somebody who was so revered and high profile and
and
famous,
loved, yeah.
yeah, and successful and, talented.
There's a couple different types of backlash.
Hmm.
Um, the one that I don't care much about is are the people that don't believe me. For
Hmm.
some reason, that one just doesn't matter that much to me, because I have, my true lived experience. So someone telling me that my life is a lie doesn't really land for me, because I know that it's not.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also evidence to back up everything that I'm saying. So if I wanted to, I could always pull out that evidence and say, well, shut up.
Yeah.
Um, but to a degree, I don't even need that. Um, so there's that backlash of people telling me I'm a liar. Um, there's the legal backlash, um, and that is tough, because that is just like a cultural or systemic problem with our judicial system, and just our society in general. The fact that you can bully someone in court financially. I mean, everyone knows that that's, Trump's MO. He can just argue someone in court till they can't pay for it, or, they can't pay for it to begin with. And, in the appearance is that you lost that case, but you didn't. You just didn't have the financial resources to fight it. So even if you have the truth on your side, you have this financial burden to overcome. That one's really sinister because I then have to make a choice. And that has been what has been making my life really hard over the past few weeks. One of the hardest things for women in domestic violence situations, and why a lot of them don't leave, or why it takes so long to leave, is because of a lack of resources, lack of social resources, lack of financial resources. It takes a long time to leave. I started working in 2016 as a means to get out because I didn't have any money. All of our money went into Chris's account, and then we had a personal account that, would get, like, the coffers would get filled once a month. And all of my money went into that joint coffered bank account, and then the rest of his money went into a different bank account that someone else.
So you were working for 6 years, knowing that because the divorce you said was 2022.
That's when it was final. I had filed in 2020, and actually had tried to file a little bit before then, but so around 2020 is when I filed.
But that's a long time to be working, to be planning an escape.
Yeah, well, and we didn't talk about it, but when I came back, after I wasn't allowed to finish, I guess I was given the illusion of choice to finish college in Philadelphia, and then when we moved out to California, I just asked Chris, just casual, normal question of what's your plan after skateboarding? And he hated that question, and he said, I don't know, I'm just going to work at Lowe's. And I said, are you serious? And he was absolutely serious. He was planning on working at Lowe's when the skate career was over. And we had just, moved me and Wyatt and ourselves out to California and bought not a lavish house, but an expensive house. And I knew that a Lowe's salary wasn't going to pay for that. So,
yeah.
And I wasn't even scoffing at the idea of a Lowe's.
Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong at working at Lowe's. It's just
no. I love building stuff, but my point was that wasn't going to cut it, so I had to go to work. So I thought about taking the more practical approach and going to nursing school. And about a year and some change into the beginnings of nursing school, he made me quit nursing school.
Wow.
So that was another blow to, like, financial freedom. And I wasn't thinking about leaving at that time. I was thinking about, preparing for the future. And so when 2015-ish rolls around, I had convinced Chris to let me work because his career was starting to die down, and health insurance is really expensive. So if I got a full-time job, I would be able to get health insurance through the company. So that's how I, convinced him to let me go to work. Knowing full well that that was my plan to, try to save some money and then also just gain some sort of resume. I forget what we were. We were talking about the Backlash.
So you said there were 3, but we were on the legal one. Because
so
you had gotten a cease and desist.
Yeah, so I got sent a cease and desist from Marty Singer, or Lavely and Singer's offices, demanding, first claiming a bunch of really weird things, and then ultimately demanding that I not only take the post down, but issue a retraction saying that I was lying. And I am not, that was really tough. Like, that's when I had to make these really tough decisions of, do I spend money? I talked to a lawyer, and even to respond to the letter was going to be $10,000, and to potentially fight it in court would be upwards of 100,000, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
Because this lawyer, that their tactic is to, work the system and file motion after motion, and they typically work with celebrities, so they just build them and build them until the person on the other end gives up.
I've gotten cease and desist before. 3 of them, actually. The first one was scary. I always knew I had truth on my side, so I still wasn't, I didn't waver, or back down. But I mean, how did you feel when you opened that letter?
I was terrified. I'm terrified because, this isn't like a dig at you, but you don't have children. So
yeah.
Whatever, if you were going to fight something in court, that is your money that you're allowed to do with as you please. And I just don't have that luxury. I have to look at my kids and think, this $150,000 could go to one of your college educations, a car for you, or just a vacation because you deserve it, because you've been put through hell for the past 10 fucking years. Or look at my fiance and say, like, I could pay off your student loans. We could finally get a sign for the barbershop. Like, just anything else.
Anything's better.
Yeah, that's a really hard decision. And then if you go and say, okay, I'm not going to fight it, I'm betraying myself again. Like, I'm right back in the hole that I just dug myself out of emotionally. And that's the bullies win. Yeah, the bullies win. And it's a justice thing, like literally and figuratively, I don't feel very righteous giving up. I feel like I'm giving up for all of the domestic violence victims that aren't able to speak up. And it's also mentally getting myself back right where I was, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where I'm making a decision that I know is hurting me. And that's the hardest pill to swallow. And that's why I'm not backing down, because I do have truth on my side. And I've talked to lawyers, and they've seen my case, they've seen the evidence, and they know that I would be fine in the end.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, I think back to the documentary, the motivation documentary, and and I think back to just the I'm going to say this word preemptively, and you can correct me. The sort of facade you have to put up publicly when all this is going on, because you're in you have to pretend like everything's fine, or more than fine, because you're going to events, you're going to premieres, you're supporting your husband, at contests, and then you're filming a documentary, and you're, what was that like for you? Did you feel like you had to say certain things or abstain from lying? I don't know. How did it feel to film a documentary that's praising somebody that's done all this stuff to you?
I was really used to people praising him, even though I knew what was really going on. That just became standard. But that filming that documentary, it felt icky. But I had asked the director, Adam, to just not include me very much and not include the kids. At the end, they said that one of the shots was really cute or whatever, and I relented and let them use a little bit of footage at the end. But I'm not in it very much. I think I'm only in it a couple times, and that was by design. I never wanted to be in the spotlight or famous or well-known in any way. I think deep down, if I were to ever be known for anything, I wanted it to be for my own talent or art, and I wanted to save that for myself. I didn't want to be forever tethered to Chris, and I thought, it's fine for him to have the spotlight for himself, but I really didn't want to be a part of it. So I had asked Adam to just use me as little as possible. I remember the questions I was asked were, I could just speak factually. Like, it basically wasn't, it was very impersonal, and it was just fact based. It's really easy for me to praise his ability in skateboarding. That doesn't bother me.
Because it's not a lie, right?
It's not a lie. It's not. So that's pretty, in that way, it's very easy to do. But I do remember just not really wanting to be a part of it, What I regret is all of the betrayal I felt toward myself in the moments. I don't regret trying to build up my husband's career. I regret not letting myself be appreciated and respected. I'm not going to go on like a parading this around in a book tour. Like, I have learned to own and be proud of the title of survivor, but it isn't my identity. I'm fine. Like, I stand in good company with the title of survivor, or the title of victim, however you want to phrase it. I am in good company. I stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say. But it's not my identity. I don't want to be the face of domestic violence, although I want to be an advocate in any way I can from here on out for the rest of my life. It's just not my identity. Someone close to the situation that said that they were not my ally asked, what do I want out of this? And I just want to be able to tell my story. That's it. I just want to be able to talk about what I went through, and not to even shame or get revenge on the other party at all. But when I was going through this, I would read other people's stories on message boards, and even on like TikTok and Instagram, I would read and a lot of podcasts, like a lot of true crime podcasts, would talk about this type of stuff, and I would just hear people's stories, and they sounded a lot like mine, and that, and then I heard how people got out of it and what they did to overcome it and where their lives are at now. So it just kind of gave me a roadmap, and it's super corny, but it gave me hope, and just like made me feel like I wasn't alone. All of that cliche stuff is very true. It's extremely true. So even if me telling the story is just paying it forward, that's a good enough reason.
I lost my dad when I was 24, 25. He was 54. But that was when I learned that hearing other people's stories and like sharing your stories, and then eventually I would tell a story to someone else who lost their parents, that was when I really learned the power of finding people that have dealt with a similar thing to you,
Yeah.
And that's always been very important to me ever since then. That was 2001, and I was on my path to being a writer right at that time. And I was like, well, this is something I can work into my career. Hopefully, is telling these stories that help other people not feel so alone, like they're the only ones. But I think what you said is super important. And as a man, and knowing we were going to do this interview, the other thing I felt was, mostly men are going to be watching this, skaters, I didn't think about that. I'm hoping that they see, not that they would all, not that they are all abusers or will go on to be abusers, but I'm hoping that they will see.
Well, they're going to experience
what a victim looks like.
Yeah. They're going to encounter people who have been victimized or are being victimized. That's guaranteed.
I'm hoping it's like some sort of educational experience for the young men that are watching this, in a way, of like, oh, I would never want to do that, to inflict that on someone, that long-term damage. Or
I didn't really think about the angle of, you know, a lot of men are going to be seeing this. And I guess if I could say anything to guys in general, what would be really helpful for people to do is, you know, if a girl's isolating herself or is isolated in general, or there's just some sort of marker that, you know, gives them a hint that maybe this person's in a bad situation. You know, the biggest hurdle that people have to deal with when they've experienced any type of assault is getting brave enough to tell someone. And that fear keeps you silent for so long. It's really just being patient with others and being a safe space to be able to hold time for them. Um, I've had a lot of male friends be able to do that, and it's telling my story to people, and then, you know, girls are girls. They're going to be like, fuck that guy, you know, whatever. And that's also very helpful, and I love all my girlfriends for doing that. But it's different when you talk to men, because a lot of times you get a lot of justification, a lot of, well, you know, what did you do? You know? And I would just encourage people to not do that. And the other thing that I would warn men about is when you are in a violent situation, if you think about a person who's actively in it, they might appear like a beaten dog. They might appear wiry and unhinged and strange. And that's unfortunate. And it's just, maybe be aware of that. If they're telling you something and they seem crazy, they might be terrified. You know, they might be just petrified of what's going to happen, and they don't know how to make words happen correctly anymore. And they're afraid of what you're going to do, or if you're going to believe it. There's anger involved. Just be patient with those types of people. And of course, there's people that make stories up, but honestly, that's more infrequent than you think. I think it's
I agree.
It's so infrequent that it's silly to not give someone the benefit of the doubt at the onset, even if they're acting strangely and not how you would expect a person to behave if they're being victimized. You don't know what that's going to look like. There's this idea of a perfect victim, and it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Like,
can you explain the perfect victim? Because you've mentioned it a few times in our conversations prior to this, and I think it's important.
Yeah. So I don't know why this is making me cry.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. The fear of not being believed, for me now, I'm fine because I'm safe now. But when you're in it and you're asking for a lifeline from someone and they turn you away, it's just so terrifying. And you have to be able to craft the right thing to say to someone. You have to behave properly so that they believe you. You know, and no, there's no abuse situation that doesn't also have toxicity in the relationship. It's not common. So girls often feel that because they caused a fight, they caused the violence to happen. That's almost exclusively always levied against them from their partner. They'll say like, well, if you didn't fight with me about this, then I wouldn't have lashed out and choked you. If you didn't do this, then I wouldn't have, you know, punched you, or whatever it is. And the people around the situation might hear, well, you know, well, she is a bitch, so, you know, did she deserve it? And that idea of a perfect victim, like, yeah, girls that are being abused might be having arguments. That's part and parcel, but it still does not give anyone the right to lay their hands on someone. I'm having the same types of arguments in my relationship now than I had in my marriage, and it's never even come close to me being hit, you know, or choked or thrown downstairs or whatever it might be. So the idea of a perfect victim, we need to kind of abolish that thinking and understand that it's more like when you see a dog that has been abused, and they're cowering and they're scared, and they fight back sometimes. That's a fear that kind of goes toward another thing that had been keeping me silent for so long, and it's, you know, the most embarrassing thing that I went through, and it is what is being levied against me in that cease and desist. Luckily, I have a ton of evidence to back up everything I'm about to say, but the idea of fighting back is something that can often keep a domestic violence victim silent. A lot of women in domestic violence situations end up being arrested, and I ended up getting arrested. In 2020 was the most recent event. I was at my lowest point. I had felt like at that point my existence in my kids' lives was hurting them. So felt like my inability to earn an income, I would never be able to get them out of the situation. I knew that the situation with me and their father was not one that they needed to be around. They needed to get out of that situation, but I wasn't going to be able to get them out. So I thought the best solution would be to take myself out of the situation, and then they could, have a peaceful life, I guess. So I tried to take my own life in 2020. And I tried to hang myself in the garage, and Chris found me and took me down, which I understand. But I was upset at him for doing that because I wanted to die. I didn't want to be taken down. So we got in a fight after. I don't know if it was even a fight, or I pushed him off of me and just said, I wish you didn't take me down. I wanted to die. And he started yelling at me and pushed me on the ground and just started choking me. He pinned my legs down, and he just started choking me and banging my head against the ground in the garage. And part of me just couldn't understand what was happening. But then it just felt more and more pressure on my neck. So I tried to grab his groin, but I couldn't, it just didn't work. I just had all of this self-defense stuff going through my mind probably from podcasts that I listened to. And that didn't work. So I tried to scratch at his eyes, just instinctually. I cannot even remember why that was what I decided to do. But I was losing air, so I had to do something. And in my mind, I thought, if I could get DNA under my nails, at least someone would know what had happened. So he let go, and I didn't know this until recently, but he let go because my daughter had walked in and saw what was happening, and she said, "Dad, stop." And he yelled at her to go back upstairs, and the police. He had called the police before because I think because of the suicide attempt. So he had said to me, "Don't tell the police what happened. If you tell them what I did, then they're going to take the kids away from both of us." Because I had just, attempted to take my own life, and he had choked me. So he said he was going to make them go away. And if I told them what happened, the kids would go to foster care, go into custody. Mm-hmm. He actually told the kids the same thing. Told the kids not to tell the police what they saw. And the police came, and they put me in handcuffs with what they said was my own safety, and I complied. I guess I understood because I was the one that tried to take my own life or whatever. So I didn't hear what he was saying, but he had told the police, and I found out later that he had told the police that I just attacked him out of nowhere, and that's why he had scratches on his face. And they asked me if I had made the scratches on his face, and I nodded yes. And I didn't say anything else because I was too afraid. They took me to the police car and just took me away. And as they were taking me away, I asked the police officer, why am I being taken away? He's the one that choked me. And they said, well, you didn't tell us that. And I said, well, I didn't know I was being arrested, and you didn't ask me. I have bruises everywhere. what do I do? And just kind of didn't say anything. So I just sobbed, fucking wept the whole time. And I remember we got to the Vista courthouse, and I remember him asking the intake clerk, can I just take her home? She shouldn't be here. And that was so heartbreaking because I knew he wasn't going to be able to take me home. And she said no, paperwork has already started, so she has to be processed. So then I go to the other, like the female correctional facility or whatever, and I never got fully booked, I guess. The case had been dropped, but while I was there, a doctor spoke to me, and she was, asked me to tell her the story, and she said to me, what I will never forget, and it was literally what got me to never turn back. And she said, I'm going to tell you something that is going to be really hard for you to hear, but you're in an abusive relationship, and you need to get out of that relationship, or he's going to kill you. She said, it's up to you now. You have to do it. We're going to give you some resources, but you have to get yourself out of this situation. And then I did. She gave me information for this place called One Safe Place that's like nearby, and it's just a domestic violence resource center for women. And that was really helpful. And then a few months later, I was able to secure an apartment and move out. So that was the actual end of what I had been dealing with. Yeah, I have evidence of this. He had written and notarized a letter saying, that he was the aggressor and had been violent toward me a number of times over the years. It's from his email, and it's like, I've talked to a lot of, police and investigators and lawyers that have said that, plus, my kids witnessing it is enough to prove that it wasn't the way that he's phrasing it. But that is what he's using in the cease and desist to kind of scare me into silence.
Yeah. Do you think your daughter saved your life?
No one's ever asked that. I didn't know that she saw anything until a couple days ago, like a week ago. So I've never had anyone ask me that.
That's okay.
Yeah. For a long time, what Chris would say to me was, he had threatened to kill me a couple times, and
you're making me cry.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So I knew that this was like a fear that I had, and he would always tell me, I didn't try to kill you because if I tried to kill you, you'd be dead. And that just never made sense to me, like there was a lot of reasons why attempted murder is a charge, and that's, there's a lot of reasons why someone might not be successful, but I didn't know that my daughter was the one who stopped him, and when she told me last week, I was just shocked. I was just shocked that she had witnessed it. I didn't think that they had witnessed it. They had witnessed other incidences, but I didn't know that they witnessed that one. So I was just kind of sad and just like heartbroken that she had seen that. So I wasn't thinking about the fact that she might have just caused that not to happen. And what I have been thinking about is that, like, she was really little at the time, and she was told not to tell the police, and she didn't because she was scared, and she didn't want her parents to get it taken away, and she sees her mom get taken away. So like, what does that tell her? You know, like she sees her mom get choked, and then her mom gets taken away from the police. You know, like what does that tell a little girl? Like, how do you tell her that defending herself is going to be the best way to protect herself? Or like, I don't know. That's been really like fucking me up over the past couple weeks. And now this will.
I'm sorry.
No, not in a bad way. But and just never thought about it. Like, what a burden for her to have to live with, you know? This sucks. That's why I wish I had gotten out sooner, because that's the kind of stuff that I just wish they didn't experience, you know?
You said there was like a third kind of a backlash. You said there was
Yeah.
people not believing you. You said there was the legal. And then what was the third?
The third is it's really painful. It's when people do believe me and they're just kind of apathetic about it, or they will still break bread and be friends with the person that did that to me. But I just find out that they're shitty people, you know, and then I lose a friend during that process, and that really sucks. And that has happened, like people that just care more about ladder climbing and things like that. That's a real bummer. But it was really the fear of someone that I valued and respected not thinking it's a big deal. And the few people that I was really concerned about showed up for me. That was great. That was a great feeling. That was what I was after for so long.
Yeah. Yeah, it must feel good to have the support of even strangers, you know, in a situation like this. Not that that's what you're seeking, but
no, but
it
but
helps
it
you
is,
realize there's some good in the world.
yeah, and that I'm not crazy. You know, I know that you definitely have had your issues with Slap Message Board, but a lot of the people on there have been really, really kind to me.
Yeah.
A few in particular over a few years too, and I've reached out to them all personally and just said thank you. And you know, skateboarding's still a boys' club, so skateboarding doesn't owe me anything. I don't need a place in skateboarding. That's not what this is about. Of course. I don't want a place in skateboarding. I don't care. You know, I still think it's cool. I've always thought it's cool. I think it's a great place in history. It's got great art. All of that still exists for me, but it's not my world, and I don't need it in my life. But it's weird that a lot of skateboarding just turns the other way and just doesn't care to look at it. Slap Message Board, you know, they very well could have just taken down the posts, and they didn't, whoever the mods are over there. You know, a lot of the comments on all of the social medias have been taken down, not even just from Chris's sponsors, but from other places. They've just been taken down in silence, which I think is just really strange. I think it's a really weird thing to happen. But they didn't take it down at Slap. So I just really appreciate the support and the kindness that I've been shown. And then doing this podcast as well, like I'm aware that not a whole lot of people are sticking their neck out. So I really appreciate you for doing this.
Yeah. I think one of the issues I have with the skateboarding media is that it's not journalism, you know. Yeah. It's fluff. It's lifestyle, you know. Like I'll compare it to sports news because that's the most comparable thing. If you're watching ESPN Sports Center or whatever these programs are now, if an athlete is arrested for drugs or uh, is charged with abuse or rape, that they talk about it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's discussed. It's like, this is
Yeah.
what this football player did. This is what this basketball player did. It's it's reported on and it's
Mm-hmm.
discussed. And one of the things about skateboarding is that people in the industry are able to know that they won't be exposed, or the
Mm-hmm.
the truth won't be talked about, because that's just not how we do it, right? That's just not how
Yeah.
skateboarding media is, right? So I've always had a big issue with that, and I've had plenty of times in my career where I said something negative in a video review and I heard about it. Like, I heard
Mm-hmm.
from, you hear from people right away, like they're mobsters. Like, why would you say that? That's not cool, man. I thought we were cool. I send you free shit. It's like I made one comment in a 500-word review that wasn't positive,
Mm-hmm.
It's not even, it's crazy. And it's like, I learned that really quickly as a writer in skateboarding, is like,
And it's also,
there's consequences to telling the truth.
it's such a strange thing to have happened because, um, there's obviously like the abuse allegations and drug things and people getting arrested or whatever, you know, news that's out there, but also like the lack of criticism prohibits growth inside of skateboarding as well. So, everyone being tight-lipped about skaters being it's a well-known secret that skaters are taken advantage of with how they're paid,
Mm-hmm.
and the lack of criticism toward that publicly keeps that going, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I so you it's like you're feeding the man, like you're letting them get away with it. Like, why it doesn't make any sense to me.
I think a lot of people are so thankful to be here and made to feel thankful to be here,
Yeah,
that you're living this
it's so
dream,
exploitative.
right? You're living
Yeah.
this dream. It's a Peter Pan lifestyle, and it's like, I mean, there were people that straight up told me when, a couple of years ago I worked for USA Skateboarding, the Olympic organization, and
Mm-hmm.
they owed me a bunch of money, and there was some pretty fucked up people in there. There was some sexual harassment that I spoke about. There was just a lot of fucked up shit, and the
Mm-hmm.
organization imploded. It doesn't exist anymore, thank God.
Yeah, I
But
remember that actually.
people were like, you're never going to get a job in skateboarding again. That's like what they said to me. They're like, and I'm like, because I'm trying to get the 20 grand they owe me. And I'm
Yeah,
like trying to make sure that these people don't hold a position of,
yeah,
running the Olympics. Like, I was just like, fuck this dude. This dude's still there. This dude sexually harassed a board member. He still has a job. And I'm emailing him every day to get my money. And he's telling me, fuck you,
yeah,
and sending me cease and desist for the emails I'm sending. And it's like, this is so backwards,
yeah.
And so I was just trying to do my thing. And the amount of people that were like, aren't you scared? You're never going to get a job again. And I'm like, dude, I don't give a fuck. Like, you know, I'm just making my own jobs now. I'm making my own jobs now. Whatever, maybe they'll work, maybe they won't.
You'll be fine. Staying on the right side of history is how you'll be fine.
A lot of people might not want someone who speaks up working for them because they know they're shady. It's like, you're not going to hire me maybe because but if you treat somebody right, they're not going to fucking go off on you.
Right.
If you're
Yeah.
good to people, they don't have anything bad to say. It's fine. So what are you worried about?
Yeah. That's how I feel with the situation I'm in. When people justify the behavior, it just makes me like I just feel like, you're telling on yourself.
Yeah.
If there's a company that's not going to hire you because you're a truth teller, you're kind of telling on yourself. Maybe
Yeah.
you guys do some things that you don't want out there.
That was helpful for me internally to realize, when like, okay, if people really don't, maybe they're not going to tell me that, but if they don't want me around because I've opened my mouth in the past or been a whistleblower or whatever, I'm okay with that
Yeah.
because you should want honest people, you know,
Yeah.
and you should not be afraid that somebody's going to like talk about the dark underbelly of your company. But
Yeah.
I don't want to go back to like, I mean, I want to go back to like a sad moment. So I
That's okay.
apologize. Um, when you were, when you tried to hang yourself, how did that situation feel like physically hanging there and
Oh, numb, numb. Like, well, I guess beforehand, just extremely painful. Like there's no greater pain than feeling like you are hurting your kids. I don't even like yelling at my kids when they do something wrong, you know? So feeling like your existence is ruining your children is that was where the pain lived. Um, so then from that point on, in my mind, I thought that that pain would go away. So it was just numb. So it was very confusing to not see the end of that. I wanted that pain to end. And what happened is I was in more pain, you know?
mm,
Uh, and I felt trapped again, as weird as it is, you know, even trying to take my own life couldn't get me out of it, you know?
mm,
That's how I was feeling in the moment.
I'm presuming that you weren't the type of person when you were a teenager before these situations that you were a suicidal type person and
No, I wasn't suicidal. I was
to be
depressed.
pushed to yeah but
Yeah.
what makes me sad is to have someone who is otherwise normal in that regard um, be pushed to the point where you think that that's like the option is like hanging yourself to make your kids have a better life is that's what you were like convinced, right? It's
Yeah, I
like
was.
that's very sad. That's
Oh,
really sad to
it's
me.
it's horrible.
You're glad to be here, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm thrilled for myself, of course, but then just for my kids. You know, not even, you know, they didn't have to deal with that pain. That's great,
Mm-hmm.
but they're going to be able to live a better life because of it. And I to know how convinced I was that I needed to leave in order for them to have a good life is it's bizarre.
How did it feel to be able to start over and like meet someone um and like we were talking earlier about, you know, being your true self, like being able to have your job and your career and do autonomy, but also meeting someone who becomes like your person and you
Yeah.
get to the point where you're at being engaged and stuff. Like how is the
Um,
sort of fresh start?
it was really strange because my like I said, my guard was really up. I feel bad for anyone who dated me in the interim because you know I had good relationships and I think I hurt people along the way, not intentionally, and I was never mean to anyone, but I know that there were people that out there that thought that things could work and I couldn't make it work. You know, it it didn't matter how good of a person they were. It, I wasn't able to do it, and that's because of you know my own unhealed trauma and the pain I was experiencing. So, you know, when I met Jay, I've known Jay for like 20 years. So
Okay.
this wasn't. Um, I was able to trust. I was able to trust that he didn't have any history of abuse. I was able to trust that he was who he says he was. You know, so that was really helpful. And we just had a lot of the same shared philosophy about life in general, and he was just the first person that I met that let me be upset about what I had gone through and
Mm-hmm.
let me be angry when I needed to be angry and sad when I needed to be sad. But he's able to laugh with me about the trauma too. That's another like
Mm-hmm.
unique like aspect.
Did you think it was weird when you were younger, the age difference when you met Chris, and the fact that, like, did you know that he was, like, technically speaking, you were underage, correct?
Yeah.
I don't, I'm only speaking this way because I don't know the law in Pennsylvania.
Well, Chris did. Um, and he like printed it out and like kept it in his back pocket because his birthday is in this is how this is just gross, but because his birthday is in March and mine is in June,
Mm-hmm.
it is illegal. We're 4 months
4
outside of
months
the legal,
illegal.
yeah, 4 months out of the legal bounds. So, but when you're cutting it that close to sleeping with someone who's underage, there's something wrong, you know? And I'm still coping with the fact or the idea that, that constitutes as grooming, you know, especially when a person's in a position of power, like a professional skateboarder with a kid who works at a skate park.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think about my daughter and, the potential for a kid her age to be, blinded by like glitz and glamour and someone older and someone like I will continue to be blamed for that. No, there's going to be a huge faction of people that will say like, well, you know, you were happy with it then, you're just complaining about it now, and that's really fucked up. Just, it is what it is. It's really fucked up. I was 16 and I got pregnant at 19, and I wasn't allowed to finish my education, and um, the whole thing is really dirty. You know, at that time, he had given me an STD as well, like so I had to navigate that as a teenager. Um, it was just all a lot to deal with as a teenager. So to have this like guy who's making more money, who's gifting me expensive things, but then cheating on me and breaking my heart, and like it's this tug and it's just like push and pull of exploiting my vulnerability there. It just really sucks.
Yeah, I was just wondering if, like, while it was happening, if you ever felt it was weird, like knowing that he's carrying that in his back pocket, and
Yeah,
like,
I thought like
or I understand how it could be exciting. Oh, sorry, I understand how it could be exciting for you. Like, you're
yeah,
falling in love, you're with this cool older kid, like,
yeah, he thinks I'm cool, right? Like,
yeah,
but I did think it was weird because there was part of me that like, well, I'm mature, so it's not weird. But then also, I had so many people in my life telling me like, well, what does a 20-year-old professional skateboarder want with a 16-year-old girl? Like, he wouldn't go to my prom with me because he was too embarrassed, and I'm like,
I was just gonna ask that. Like, did you guys do those things? Yeah.
no. His friend who was closer to my age went with me. He
Oh,
wouldn't
wow.
go. But then I went to his house after, and like had sex with him after my high school prom in my prom dress that he didn't go with me. Like it's gross.
I'm like super blown away, impressed, thankful, like in awe of this whole situation. Like, you coming out and speaking about it, you being willing to talk, you being willing to talk to me about it and share it with the world. I know your intentions are to share it for good reasons, you know, to try to help people. And I guess I just want to say thank you. And I am here for you. I know there's a lot of people here for you. You're brave and smart and awesome. And I'm glad things are better for you now. And you have a good man and all that stuff. And you're out of the sketchy situation and you're on to like better lives for you and your kids and all that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the exact words, but I'm just like thankful and happy for you and everything.
Thank you. I mean, thanks for saying all that.
Yeah.
And just thank you for like giving me a platform, you know, and you know, we talked a lot about this conversation ahead of time, and just thanks for being like patient and thoughtful in your questions and stuff like that. Like, even if this never saw the light of day, this conversation is really helpful. You know, this is the most I've been able to even plainly talk about it, because it feels icky for people to talk about, you know, and I guess that's another piece of advice. Like, if it feels icky to hear people talk about it, like, put aside your own discomfort sometimes, you know, and just let people like word vomit. So yeah, thank you. Like, it's extremely helpful to just be able to talk about it and have someone listen.
Yeah.
And see me for who I am. So I really appreciate it, genuinely. I guess the other thing I'd like to say is to, you know, anyone who does listen, if they need to reach out to me, or if they ever reach out to you, and you can direct them over to me.
Yeah.
Sometimes a weird, strange lifeline is all it takes to kind of get yourself out of it. So that's always open, and I really do hope this helps someone, because stuff like this really did help me. So it's a genuine attempt to help anyone out there. And I didn't even think about the fact that it's going to reach people who might not typically listen to stuff like this. So that's really great.
Yeah. All right. Go back to having a normal night, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.